or 60 feet per second. And that difference in speed, which doesn't seem that vast, has a big impact on your stopping distance. So obviously, the faster we're going on any vehicle, we take a longer distance and more time to come to a stop. And that's what I want to talk about now is your best way of avoiding your name being on an incident report for traveling too fast is not to. And I'd like to promote riding at 50, approaching and going through intersections. That's the most dangerous part of our ride. I'm sure you'd agree. We have an instructor, Johnny Chimello, who is a pro road racer. He is freaked out riding in city traffic. He hates it. He would far rather be on a racetrack with other pros going 300 kilometers an hour. And he honestly believes that's safer than riding in city streets. The reason is there's no intersections on a racetrack. Everybody's going the same direction and they're all professionals. So he's inches away from another rider at very high speed, high braking corners, and he feels completely at home because he feels safe there. The problem with city traffic, which is far more dangerous statistically than on the highways, is that interaction at intersections with other vehicles. Some going east, some west, and they turn into our lanes. So if you're going 50 kilometers an hour, something happens up ahead of you and you have to come to a really hard stop. Can you do it? Now, a lot of us, 2/3 of people in Ontario, took a 2-day rider training course to get their motorcycle license. And on that course, section 6 of the test, where the person did this, you had to reach 25 kilometers an hour and come to a quick stop. You could skid, you just couldn't cross the line. A lot of street riders that I've met haven't really done an emergency stop since they took that license test on a very small motorcycle that the course provided at 25 kilometers an hour. And then they're out on a much bigger bike on a busy road, traveling a lot faster, and they haven't really got that braking practice. That's what part of this presentation is we would implore you to do some refresher training, take some advanced rider training, or at least go out in a parking lot in the spring and hammer on the brakes, get used to it again. And why should you? Let's say you're riding at 50 kilometers an hour and something happens. It takes 0.7 of a second, a little less than 1 second, for your brain to see the hazard and then to get all the neurons pulsing to put brakes on. In that small time, we call that the thinking distance. The distance and time it takes the brain to acknowledge the hazard and get on to the brakes. You haven't put the brakes on yet, you're just reaching for them. So at 0.7 of seconds, the thinking distance you will travel before you get the brake on at 50 kilometers an hour is 9 meters. Now, you're on the brakes, you come to a good stop, and these statistics were for an alert, competent rider. So not a rider who's lollygagging around looking at whatever's on the sidewalk. It's an alert person in traffic, head up, scanning left and right. So they get on the brakes. It takes an additional 14 meters to come to a stop. So the thinking distance, the actual braking distance at 50 kilometers an hour for an average rider, 23 meters, which is 75 feet. To put it in car lengths, that's an average of 6 car lengths it takes you to come to a stop. Now, how about if you're going 65 kilometers an hour in the 50 zone when something happens? Your thinking distance goes up to 12 meters, braking distance 24, total of 36 meters from the time you see it to the brain kicks in and you get on the brakes and stop, 36 meters, or for us old folks like me, as Canadians, we haven't really changed a metric, have we? We still do our height and weight in imperial. That's 118 feet it takes to come to a stop, or 9 car lengths. Now, that takes practice and muscle memory to be able to stop that quickly. So if you haven't done it since you took your training and your license test, are you really safe on the road on your motorcycle? I don't think so. You've got to refresh, especially in the spring, because our skill sets are rusty. Haven't been on the road in 4 or 5 months. An interesting thing in meeting police officers, because I've checked these statistics with the RCMP in Calgary and in Vancouver. When I've done a little traveling, my wife and I always make a stop at a rider training school or talk to a Bobby in England who rides. It's very, very similar. Obviously in England, the car turns right in front of them. Here it's they turn left, other side of the road. An interesting factor that police officers who investigate motorcycle fatalities say is sometimes with a non-ABS equipped motorcycle, just standard hydraulic brakes, there's no skid mark. So the car cut them off, or the truck, and there's no indication of hard braking. If you don't have ABS and you're in a bit of a panic, it's almost impossible not to lock up the rear wheel on a motorcycle. In a panic situation, very, very hard not to put the brake on hard enough to skid. There should be black tire marks on the pavement, and the police officers tell me oftentimes the bike is in the back of the car and the person sadly didn't make it and there's no skid marks. I interpret that to be that the rider was buzzing along, they saw it happened, and they froze. They didn't back off the throttle, they didn't downshift, they didn't swerve, and they didn't hammer on the brakes. They simply went, kunk. That tells me they didn't have what I'm proposing as practiced muscle memory habits. I believe that when we panic as humans, we resort back to what's instinctive or practiced. So that's why we do a lot of braking in any kind of rider training, or if the water bottle falls, we practice and again and again and again to make sure you're comfortable when it happens. You'll be able to immediately get onto the brakes and hopefully avoid hitting the vehicle. Even if I can't stop completely, I want to scrub off as much speed as possible. But the big difference, we were talking about space and distance. 15 kilometers an hour over the speed limit at 65, it takes you a further 40 feet to stop, or 3 car lengths. That braking distance alone could be the difference of you making it home for your own dinner, or perhaps there's those little sandwiches at your memorial service. So it's really important to be able to stop quickly on your motorcycle. Now there's lots of variants. The tires you have, the condition, the temperature of your tire and the road, the condition of the road. So if you're an experienced rider, I'm preaching to the choir, but all of the junk isn't off our roads yet. It's May the 1st, the start of Motorcycle Safety Month, but there's still a lot of sand and corners, especially in rural areas, especially if there's a gravel soft shoulder. A lot of junk is still on the road, especially the back roads that I ride. It's paved, but there's a gravel shoulder. You know, some nut in a truck has taken the corner wrong, and 2 wheels have dragged dirt and gravel up onto the road. So in the spring, you can't go as fast into the corners. That's very, very important. The faster we go on a motorcycle, physics tells us the more it has to lean. The more you're leaned over, the more susceptible you are for the front wheel to go out. You'll lose traction leaned over too far. Or if your tires are really cold. So think of that in that May, June morning or late evening when you're leaving work. Temperature drops dramatically. Your traction also drops. Sound good? Now, normally when I'm teaching, there's live people standing there, and I kind of get a feel of, did that make sense? Did it not? People put their hand up. So I'm hoping that all of those things, that's the only part I use as far as number statistics. The rest of it is valid points, but I wanted to clearly indicate that a little bit more speed than the posted minimizes your ability to stop in time. Now, another collision avoidance option, other than just jumping off, would be swerving. But swerving in an intersection scenario sometimes doesn't work because there's a light standard there. There's other vehicles in other lanes. There's traffic. So swerving around the vehicle that's cut us off or pulled out in front of us is not as good as an option as braking. And we'll elaborate a little bit more on that with the next scenario that we want to talk about, which is the second most common thing that the investigating officer would write down on the incident report. And that is the vehicle that is approaching you on your bike and they turn left across your path. If you've ridden for at least a season, I'm sure it's already happened to you. If it's happening to you 2 or 3 times a week, or you have to hammer on the brakes in traffic every time you ride to work, the problem may not be the traffic. It might be you. You're riding a little too aggressively for city traffic. But let's get back to turning left. First of all, why do vehicles turn left across a motorcyclist path more so than they would a car or truck? The investigating officer would, if the person stops, would ask the driver, why did you turn left? It's obviously, witnesses have told us, you cut this rider right off. The most common thing that the rider would hear, if they still can, or the officer, I'm sorry, I didn't see them. Now we have our headlights on. Why don't they see us? And I've talked to vision experts. I've tried to analyze this because I've been cut off as well. And I wear a bright yellow helmet or a bright Arai, a multicolored one. I wear a retroreflective yellow vest. My goal is that people see me in traffic. I don't care if they have to pull over and throw up after seeing me. I just want to be seen. But sometimes I've been cut off dressed as that nut with the yellow jacket, visor, and helmet.